Now to make our peach wine, we are going to be using the following. We need 5 cans. These are 15-ounce cans because they don't make them in 16 ounces anymore, not that I know of sliced peaches. We want to make sure that they're 100% juice, and we want to make sure that they do not contain preservatives. We're going to need somewhere between 3 and 4 cups of sugar. Not quite sure how much sugar we're going to add just yet because I want to take hydrometer readings to make sure that I hit at least 1.080 on my hydrometer. We're going to need a handful of chopped raisins. We're going to be using 1/4 of a lemon, which is going to give us some of our acidity. We're going to need 1 black tea bag, which is going to help give us some of our tannin, which is going to help provide a little bit of astringency at the back end when the fermentation has finally been complete. This time around, I'm going to be using a Red Star Premier Coupe de Blanc wine yeast because of its very low ABV potential, and it is good for what will eventually be kind of a white wine. Now, if you don't have that, the old standby will still work. A pack of active dry original yeast. We're going to need that anyway, so you might want to have both on hand. We're going to be using the bread yeast to help make our yeast nutrient. It's just your basic homemade yeast nutrient to help the fermentation along a bit. It wouldn't hurt to have a couple of straining bags. Since we're making a gallon of wine, it would help if we had a gallon of clean filtered water. And it would also help to have a wide mouth fermenter, plastic jug, jar, whatever, that has a wide mouth opening so you can get your straining bags into. You're going to need a 1 gallon jug, carboy, demijohn, take your pick. And you're also going to need an airlock with bung. Actually, you're going to need 2 of these, but at least you now know 1 jug, 1 airlock, times 2. A hydrometer with testing tool will be helpful to let us know how much sugar we need to add and to let us know how our fermentation is going and what the end number is going to be to determine how much alcohol we have produced in our wine. And using your sanitizer of choice, we want to make sure that everything has been properly cleaned and sanitized before we begin this project and also during this project. And that's what I'm going to be using to make this wine. Now, there are a couple of ways we can handle these peaches. We can simply put them in the straining bags whole. We can do a rough chop. We can puree the peaches. I mean, the choice is really up to you. I've decided that since I've got a food processor handy, I'm going to use a food processor and do a kind of a rough chop. And since I've got a food processor this time around, I think I'll throw the raisins in there as well, saving a little bit of time trying to rough chop those as well before everything goes into the straining bags. Okay, now first thing is first, after having cleaned and sanitized my food processor, let's go ahead and crack open a can. And let's pour those bad boys in there. Okay, working with just 2 cans at a time. Let's go ahead and we're going to have to pulse it, which works fairly well. I don't really want to puree it, at least not this time. And following that, I now want to get those into our freshly sanitized bags and bowls without making too much of a mess. Although experience really has taught me, really just pour it into a measuring cup, a large measuring cup, and then pour that into the bags. But sharp instruments aside, most of it got in there. And let's go ahead and finish up the rest of the batch. But this time, let's go ahead and throw in our raisins. before finishing up the job. All right, let's go ahead and tie these bags off. All right, and that is that. Okay, now here over the stove, we've got about, I don't know, anywhere from a quarter to half a cup of water. It's really not that critical. And our black tea bag. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that in. And let's bring our water up to a simmer. All we really want to do is make a nice little quarter to half a cup of strong black tea, which is acting as our tannin substitute, which again, it's going to provide some astringency to the wine when everything is all said and done. Now moving on to our yeast nutrient, we're going to take about, let's just say about a quarter of a cup of water. And we want to go ahead and bring that to a boil. I mean, you don't have to use a microwave. You could use just boil it in a pot on the stove. But we just need boiling water because the intent is when we add our yeast, we want our yeast to die relatively quickly. And that's going to act as the nutrient to our peach wine. Okay, with our water nice and hot, we want to take about a quarter of a teaspoon, if I can do this on camera without moving everything, take a quarter of a teaspoon and just go ahead and add it in and stir it in. And we can just go ahead and set that aside and let that cool down a bit. Might as well get our lemon prepped. Again, the lemon is acting as our acid blend substitute, which is going to provide a little acidity or brightness to our wine. And experience has now taught me that all I need is a quarter of a lemon. We are going to strain this through a small strainer because we don't want any seeds to get into our wine, which might cause bitterness later on. All right, let's start assembling everything into our fermenter, which, by the way, I should point out that this particular fermenter does have a built-in airlock. It does also come with a standard bubbler airlock, but I find this one just does the trick. If you don't have one of these, then you'll be using a standard airlock. All right, now for the messy part. Okay, that was pretty easy. As we'll go ahead and add in our lemon / acid blend substitute. No need to be precise. Just don't get any seeds in there. That's all that matters. Get that out the way. Go ahead and add in our tannin substitute. That out the way. Go ahead and get our yeast nutrient in there. Get that out the way. We may as well start adding in some of our water. We're not going to pour in the whole thing. We're just going to pour it up to nearly, and I mean not quite, the 1 gallon mark. Because remember, we still have to determine how much sugar we need to add, and then we need to add in that sugar. So with that having been done, let's go ahead and give that a good stir, mashing down on some of the bags. And let's go ahead and take that initial hydrometer reading. Now it looks like our first reading came in at 1.024. So we know we're going to add some additional sugar, trying to hit 1.080. So I'm going to start out by adding, just to be on the safe side, 2 cups of sugar, but it looks like probably 3. So I'll start adding in some sugar. All right, after adding just the 2 cups of sugar, I came up with a new hydrometer reading of 1.088. Overshot it just by a tad, but quite frankly, I'm still happy with it. I mean, if I really wanted to, I can just simply add a little water and dilute it down a little bit to hit my mark, but 1.088 is just fine. Now, the next thing we want to do, since we have the opportunity, is go ahead and stir up our mixture. Give it a nice vigorous stir, because we want to try and add in a little bit more oxygen into our mixture to help the yeast out a bit, at least initially. We'll give that a pretty decent stir. And now we can start thinking about adding in our yeast. Again, with my batches, I always use for the most part, just a 1/4 teaspoon of yeast. And everything's always worked just fine. Try to sprinkle it around as much as possible. I mean, you could stir it in, or you could have bloomed the yeast beforehand, but basically, this has always worked for me. Now, all I need to do at this point is to put our lid back on, nice and tight, and get this out of the kitchen sink. Now what we need to do is that we need to label our creation, so we know what it is we're making later on down the road. We're making a canned peach wine. We started it on this date, and our starting gravity was 1.088. Okay, now for the next 3 days, we want to go in and give everything a nice vigorous stir to incorporate a little bit more oxygen, help the yeast out. But after that 3 days, we don't want to do that anymore. We want to just leave it alone. At the end of 5 days total, 5 to 7 days, we can go ahead and remove those straining bags. And we can actually transfer this into our secondary carboy to begin secondary fermentation. And then we'll begin the process of periodically racking, which is what we're doing, from one carboy to another, to get the wine or the musk at this point off of any sediment that might be building on the bottom of the carboy. And we'll continue to do that until the wine is clear or it's to our liking. Generally, I like to go about 12 months before I do a tasting of the wine to find out how things turned out. So in 12 months' time, I look forward to seeing our tasting video. If there are any changes to the recipe after the tasting, I will make those changes to the ingredients that will be listed in the original video, which is this one, in the description section of the video. So until then, before I go, for those of you who might have questions or comments about, well, can you make it this way? Can you make it that way? I'm not going to know because I've made it this way. Okay, so that's as far as that's going to go. So if you like what you see here, again, please click on the subscribe and notify button, and I will continue to do these more often.